Chapter 5. Under Fire. The chill of the dark void of space couldn't penetrate the hull of the shuttle, but it did nothing to ease the cold tension between Luminara Zen and Lieutenant Don Carlos. As they piloted towards the threatened colony, the cramped confines of the shuttle seemed to shrink with each terse exchange. The instruments hummed softly in the background, punctuating a silence fraught with unspoken criticisms and carefully masked anxiety. Their mission was clear: to scout the perimeter of the colony and reinforce its defenses, a precaution against the increasingly bold Xanthor raids. The colony, a ragged assembly of domes and rigs on the barren moon of Vesta 6, glinted distantly like a cluster of fallen stars against the dark canvas of the universe. As the shuttle descended, Luminara's sharp eyes scanned the horizon. The landscape was a tapestry of shadows and silvery light, the surface uneven and fraught with the jagged scars of previous skirmishes. Her fingers moved instinctively over the controls, adjusting their trajectory, her movements precise and detached. Carlos watched her, his gaze lingering not on her practiced movements but on the set line of her jaw and the slight furrow in her brow. "We'll make a low pass over the northern sector," he suggested, his voice a deliberate calm that contrasted with the tightness in his shoulders. Without a word, Luminara obliged, steering the shuttle in a sweeping arc. Below them, the colony's defenses, a series of automated turrets and barrier shields, stood silent and watchful. It was quiet. Too quiet. That's when the alarms blared. Red lights flashed, slicing through the shuttle's dim cockpit as an urgent warning flared on the dashboard. Intruder alert. Multiple approaches from the east. "Xanthor," Luminara hissed, her body tensing as she shoved the throttle forward. The shuttle lurched, engines whining in protest as she veered sharply to confront the threat. Carlos's hands flew to the weapons console, his earlier reservation replaced by focused action. "I've got visual. 4 signatures," he called out, locking onto the incoming blips that marked their foes. The Xanthor craft were sleek and vicious, resembling the predatory insects they shared their lineage with. As they swooped in, their hulls shimmered with a chitinous gleam, deflecting the weak light of Vesta's sun. Their weapons charged, spitting out blasts of charged energy with ruthless precision. Luminara maneuvered the shuttle with a deft touch, dipping and weaving through volleys of fire. Each blast that rocked their ship was met with a grunt or a sharp command. "Hold steady," she barked, as Carlos returned fire, his shots slicing through the void toward their assailants. Amidst the chaos, a realization dawned on Carlos. The fluidity of Luminara's piloting, her innate understanding of the enemy's tactics. It was more than skill. It was an elegant dance of survival honed by too many battles. He felt a grudging respect worm its way into his chest, perhaps the first thread of true partnership. Together, they clipped one of the Xanthor ships, sending it spiraling into the moon's dusty surface. The other Xanthors regrouped, intensifying their assault, their movements synchronized and relentless. "We need to retreat," Carlos advised, noting their depleting shield strength. But Luminara shook her head, her eyes alight with a fierce determination. "No, we can take them," she declared, pulling the shuttle into a risky maneuver that skirted them perilously close to the moon's surface, using its craggy landscape as cover. Carlos held his breath, trusting her judgment, his fingers steady on the trigger. They emerged from a narrow canyon, the Xanthor ships in hot pursuit. "Now!" Luminara shouted, and Carlos unleashed the full fury of their rear cannons. The world turned white with the discharge of energy, and when it cleared, 2 Xanthor ships were nothing more than drifting debris. Breathing heavily, they steadied the shuttle, surveying the damage and the quiet battlefield. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the echoes of the blasts still rang in their ears. Luminara turned to Carlos, her eyes not softening, but her voice carried a new note, a hint of respect. "Good shooting, Lieutenant." Carlos nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "Good flying, Scout." As they made their way back to the colony, a silent agreement formed between them, born from the fires of conflict, a mutual recognition of each other's worth and a burgeoning sense of camaraderie. The mission was far from over, but as they docked at the colony, Both knew that the real battle was just beginning. Chapter 6. Quiet Revelations. The hum of the Nova cruiser's engines provided a constant, soothing backdrop as the vessel carved its way through the starlit void. Luminara Zen stood at the observation deck, her gaze fixed on the infinite mosaic of stars. Each one, a silent witness to millennia of cosmic ballets and battles, felt like an echo of her own turbulent thoughts. Earlier skirmishes with the Xanthor had left the crew tense and weary, the ship itself nursing scars that mirrored those on Luminara's heart. It was during these moments of compulsory calm that her thoughts ventured into the quieter, shadowed corners of her mind, dragging forth memories she often wished remained forgotten. As she stood lost in the galaxy's embrace, footsteps approached, soft but assured. Lieutenant Don Carlos appeared beside her, his presence no longer setting off the storm of irritation it once had. He respected the silence for a few heartbeats, watching the cosmos with her. "The stars are particularly bright tonight," he remarked, his voice low, almost blending into the hum around them. "They are always bright," Luminara responded without looking at him. "We just don't always see them." "That's an interesting way to put it," Carlos said. He leaned against the railing, his eyes still fixed on the void. "Sometimes I think it's the same with people." Luminara turned to him, her expression unreadable. "How so?" "We often don't see what someone truly is, or we choose not to, until circumstances light them up in ways we can't ignore." The conversation paused as a shooting star streaked across the void, its brief, brilliant path a silent testament to fleeting visibility. "You've been lighting up since you came aboard, Luminara," Carlos continued, his tone careful. "Not everyone sees it yet, but I do." Surprised, Luminara felt a warmth that had little to do with the ship's regulated air. "And what exactly do you think you see, Lieutenant?" Carlos smiled, a genuine soft curving of his lips that reached his eyes. "I see someone incredibly brave. Someone who's been through hell, but still stands here, looking out into the universe with hope. Someone who, I believe, cares deeply, though she's scared to show it." The words stirred something within Luminara, a flicker of something long suppressed. The deck felt suddenly too small, the stars too close. "I'm not," she began, but Carlos held up a hand, stopping her. I know. You're not used to this. Neither am I," he admitted. "But here, on this ship, we're all we've got. We're all coming from different corners of the galaxy, with different scars and stories. And somehow, we've got to make it work. Not just survive, but really make it work." Luminara turned back to the stars, considering his words. The vastness of space could make anyone feel insignificant. Yet here, in this fleeting moment, she felt a connection, a tether, extending not just to Carlos but to the entire crew. "Maybe," she finally said, "it's about finding the light in each other, even when it's faint." Carlos nodded. "Especially when it's faint." They shared a look, an acknowledgement of barriers breaking, however slightly. The moment stretched, comfortable, before Carlos spoke again. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow's briefing might give us more than we're bargaining for." Luminara agreed, but as she moved to leave, she felt lighter, as if the ship had shed some of its gravitational pull. In the silence of her own quarters, her last glance was not at the reports on her desk, but at the stars beyond her window. Quiet revelations indeed. Chapter 7. The Bonds of Battle. The Nova cruiser hummed through the blackness of space, its engines a soft whisper against the cosmic winds. Aboard, the mood was tense, the air charged with anticipation and dread. Luminara Zen stood at the command center, her eyes scanning the myriad of screens that displayed the streaming data from the outer sensors. Her posture was rigid, every muscle taut with readiness. Beside her, Lieutenant Don Carlos operated the communication console, his fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. "Xanthor ships on approach," Carlos announced, his voice steady but underlain with a thread of urgency. 2, no, 3 cruisers, closing in fast. Luminara's gaze hardened. The memory of the Xanthor's last attack was still fresh, a scar upon her mind. She would not let a repeat occur. Signal all decks to battle stations. Prepare to engage enemy on my command. As the crew hustled to their positions, a palpable silence fell over the cruiser, the calm before the storm. Then, as the first blips of the Xanthor fleet appeared on the main screen, a collective breath was held. The Xanthor cruisers, grotesque in their angular insect-like design, advanced with a menacing synchronicity. Luminara's mind raced, evaluating strategies, discarding one after another as too risky, too predictable. Her eyes flickered to Carlos, who met her gaze, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They were in this together, whatever came next. Then, an idea sparked. Carlos, divert power to the aft shields and prepare to execute a full burn on my mark. I want us to charge. Charge, ma'am? His eyebrow cocked in surprise, but his hands moved to comply. Yes, charge. Straight at them. It's the last thing they'll expect. The Nova cruiser surged forward as the engines roared to life, cutting across the void towards the enemy. On the view screen, the Xanthor ships hesitated, their movements betraying a moment of confusion. Luminara smiled coldly. Now, deploy the lateral thrusters, full spread. The cruiser veered sideways with astonishing agility, presenting a narrower profile to the enemy. The Xanthor's return fire missed, their energy blasts slicing harmlessly through space where the Nova had been seconds before. Good. Now hit them with everything we've got, Luminara ordered. The cruiser's cannons blazed, sending a volley of high-energy plasma towards the disoriented Xanthor ships. One cruiser took a direct hit, its shields flaring under the impact before fizzling out. The ship listed, damaged and vulnerable. Carlos punched the air. Direct hit! Luminara didn't celebrate. Her eyes were fixed on the tactical display, analyzing the Xanthor's next move. Keep on them, she commanded. Target the propulsion systems. I want those ships immobile. As the Nova cruiser unleashed another barrage, a critical hit on the lead Xanthor ship triggered a chain reaction, its engine core erupting in a brilliant flash of destructive beauty. The disabled ship drifted, now just space debris. The crew of the Nova cheered, a sound mingled with relief and triumph. But Luminara remained focused, her thoughts already moving to the aftermath. They had won, yes, but at what cost? And for how long? Carlos stood beside her, watching the remaining Xanthor ships make a hasty retreat. They're pulling back, he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. For now, Luminara replied, her voice tinged with the weight of command. But they'll be back. We need to be ready. As the adrenaline faded, Luminara felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Carlos, his touch grounding. We did good today, he said softly. Thanks to you. Luminara turned to look at him, her stern facade softening. No, thanks to us. This crew, you. I'm starting to believe we might just make it through this. As the Nova cruiser resumed its patrol, Luminara and Carlos returned to their duties. The bonds formed in battle solidifying into something stronger, something akin to hope.